watching Goal Line Extended, presented by Lacrosse Flash.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Goal Line Extended. Today is Friday, April 9, and I'm your host, Ryan Hulsebos. Thank you for joining us for our sixth show of GLE. We are happy that you are here watching or listening from wherever you might be. Goal Line Extended is available on YouTube and as a podcast for your viewing or listening conveniences. Make sure to check out all of our links in the description. But we have an exciting show planned today. In a few moments, the PLL's Joe Keegan will be joining me to talk about some of the biggest storylines around the Premier Lacrosse League as we continue on here into the month of April. The college draft just a few weeks away. April 26th, the new start date. And until then, the league's 8 teams filling out their rosters to some degree as we move closer and closer to that draft date, Monday, April 26th. And then the waiver wire and trade window set to close on April 30. Could we see any moves made before that deadline? Joe is here to tell us everything that we need to know and should be keeping on our radar. And then in a little bit, Flash's Liam Kelly will be joining me to look ahead to this weekend's action in college lacrosse, a handful of big conference games with tournament seeding implications both this weekend and throughout the rest of the month of April. Liam and I have you covered. Stick around and you'll be able to catch that. And then to wrap up today's show, Water Dogs LSM, Rochester Nighthawks transition man, and Team Canada's all-world defenseman, Ryland Reese, will be joining me. You don't want to miss it. So stay right here on GLE as we get right into today's show. And as I said, joining me now, Joe Keegan from the PLL and PLL Stats. Joe, what's going on? How you doing? Welcome to Goal Line Extended.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, I just talked about the college draft and then obviously looking ahead to the offseason and the trade window and waiver wire closing, looking ahead to what we might see going forward. But before we move any further, I want to backtrack. We've been busy here, the last few weeks. You in particular hosting the entry draft on Twitter Spaces, the film studies and player spotlights that we've been seeing the league roll out here over the last few weeks. We're expecting those to pick up again here as we have the college draft coming up. But we're almost through the offseason right now. I'd say we're a good 2/3 of the way through here in early April. But at this point right now, taking expansion into consideration, the handful of trades we've been given, the entry draft, and now the moves that we've been seeing during the waiver period. In your opinion, which team has done the best? Which team has the most room for improvement? We know the Atlas still have a ton of picks. The Chaos have a handful as well in the college draft. And then out of all the additions made so far, which one do you think plays the biggest role and makes the biggest impact right away in year one for their new team?
Yeah, if you're talking about the team that's done the best this offseason, you got to start with the reigning back-to-back champs, the Whipsnakes. They lost 2 guys in the expansion draft. You can't really do much better than that. Thanks to all the retirements that they had this offseason, they were really able to protect their core 14. I don't know that anybody felt stronger about their 14 than the Whipsnakes did. They retained Rambo and Zed on attack, their entire close defense, Joe Nardella at the faceoff stripe. Really, everywhere you look, the Whips retained their championship roster and then reloaded via that entry draft when they got Chris Islanian and Charlie Hayes to really replace some of those guys who did retire in the middle of the field.
I had that ready for the end of the show. How did we allow the Whipsnakes to do this here? How did we allow them to get even better? They got Matt Abbott through the waivers, letting Brian Cole slip to the 3rd round. How do we allow this to happen?
That's what they do. That's what they do. Stags does his research. Coach Murphy and Coach Grady are watching as much film as anyone, prepping. I will say, I do think that D mid spot is still a question mark. They may have gotten better in some areas, maybe on the offensive midfield side. I really do like that Brian Cole and Chris Islanian pickup, but there's no replacing Tyler Warner. I mean, we can't sugarcoat that. Yes, they got a player who plays short stick D midi to come in and fill that roster spot, but there's only one Tyler Warner, and if he's not in a Whipsnakes uniform next year, then they have a hole. It's they're not better at that one position.
I wouldn't say filling Tyler Warner's role is easy, but if Zach Goodrich had fallen to 7, that would not have been too bad of a replacement there, if you ask me. The Chaos, they're yet to make a waiver claim here in the days and weeks following the entry draft. However, all 7 of the other head coaches have made at least one claim. The Cannons, a total of 9 additions to max out their roster at 30 players. And then for the Water Dogs, Coach Copeland making just one claim, putting his team at 27 players. And that includes defenseman Noah Richard. We don't know yet, the full extent of his availability availability this summer. But speaking of these additions, Austin and I discussed a little bit on Tuesday about it. Some coaches making claims, filling up their rosters with what looks to be the expectation to come out of the college draft with over 30 players, 30 being that magic number that teams need to get to at the start of the season. Other coaches, however, like Towers, opting to stay where he is. He's currently at 25 players, 6 picks, so still that expectation that he'll go over 30 players heading into April 27. But, Joe, why aren't all the teams doing what Coach Quirk did and then just filling up their rosters with as much pro talent as possible and then waiting to figure out kind of all the rest after the college draft?
Yeah, there's two schools of thought there. For some of these teams, like you mentioned, with the Water Dogs having Noah Richard and Chaos having a couple players who their military commitments could prevent them from making that 30-man roster. So those 6 college picks might not necessarily put them over 30. The two schools of thoughts that we're seeing are the Cannons, who have loaded up that roster with the college draft still to go. They have 2 picks there at the end of the month. And then the other teams who are saving that space, I think with those teams that are saving that space, we're seeing coaches who want to do right by the players and want to give them the best opportunity to make a training camp roster. So it doesn't help the players or the coaches to pick up somebody who they don't believe will be on that 30-man roster that goes to training camp. So if they have no intentions of bringing a guy to camp, they're not going to claim him right now.
Wait until the college draft, bring a rookie that you draft, a new guy that you bring in to camp. That does make a lot of sense as we're kind of getting an idea here how as the waiver period's rolling along seems to be on a rolling basis with these deadlines for coaches to submit claims throughout the week. As we get closer and closer to April 26th, and as these teams get a better idea of what their identity will be, what the lineup might look like, whether it be a plan to carry over from last season or maybe a totally new plan with new faces in the building, the college lacrosse season then also rolling along, starting to get a better idea of who might be available, how the draft should move along given some of the talent available, and then team needs. As we get close to this draft, how many claims do you expect to be made between now and April 26th? We just saw a few made at the end of last week. Do you expect anything major, I should say?
I wouldn't expect anything major. I think there are a couple spots still to be filled. The Whip Snakes need a backup goalie after losing Jacob Stover. So whether they pick one up now or they wait to see how one of these camp battles plays out. The Redwoods right now are one of several teams with 3 goalies on their roster. They just brought in Brian Phipps. Will Brian Phipps and Jack Kelly and Tim Troutner all make that 25-man roster? The Whips could wait for one of those camp battles to play out and then pick up a backup goalie. So I wouldn't expect anything major in the next couple of weeks.
The Whip Snakes with 1 goalie, the Chrome with 1 face-off man. The Atlas do have Chris Matz, but I'm not entirely sure of his availability for the summer. So there are a few teams kind of just highlighting face-off and goalie that do have 1 guy, so probably set to add a backup. Moving along here, let's look ahead to this college draft, a team that we've been watching very closely this offseason. Aside from the expansion team, the Cannons, we've been keeping a very close eye on Ben Rubier and the Atlas. Rubier making a flurry of moves leading up to the expansion draft. He sent Paul Rabel to the Cannons, shuffled around some entry and college draft picks. He picked up the last pick of the first round in the upcoming college draft in that Paul Rabel trade. He also sent Ryan Brown to the Water Dogs for Andy Copeland's second-round selection. That is the 11th overall pick of the draft. It will be his 4th within the first 11 selections if he keeps all those picks, and then he won't pick again until 17 at the top of the 3rd round. Joe, it seems like Duke's Mike Sowers was a lock to go first overall in this college draft since he decided this time last year that he would return for another year of college lacrosse, transferring to Duke after a storied 4 years at Princeton. You could probably make the argument that the Archers would have taken him first overall a year ago if he was set to play at the pro level last season. Sowers being a guy that Coach Bates recruited to Princeton but never got the opportunity to coach. But it looks like a slam dunk here for Coach Rubier, adding a gifted passer, a gifted dodger, scorer, and Mike Sowers first overall to complement the other pieces he has on offense.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I know what Coach Rubier is doing with number 1. Michael Sowers is a phenomenal talent, but I think Coach Rubier took everybody by surprise in the entry draft and could still have some more tricks up his sleeve. I'd say Jared Bernhardt from Maryland, Jeff T from Cornell are as much in that conversation for the number 1 pick as Sowers is.
We don't want to look too far ahead because we need content here for the show over the next 2 weeks leading up to this draft. But looking ahead there to picks 8, 10, and 11, I would say these picks might even be more important than, that possibility to lock up Sowers first overall. Obviously, other names there as well. But give me some names that you think could end up falling there to the end of the first round, the beginning of the second. How do they fit into what Coach Rubier is trying to build here at Atlas LC? Again, not exactly a rebuild. It's more of a retool, as our good friend Austin Owens coined for us.
Yeah, I like the retool. I think Rubio probably likes that too. He's not a fan of the rebuild name. But whether they're retooling or just building, for this 2021 season, there are going to be a lot of opportunities to add talent at 8, 10, and 11. You look at how some of these top picks are going to play out. We can see some guys who maybe don't necessarily fit a role on one of those top 7 teams picking in the draft. A guy like Mac O'Keefe, who's a left-handed sharpshooter, might not fit on one of those teams that already has a lefty, so he could slip down there. Maybe a guy like Connor Kirst, who right now is really playing out of position, playing down on attack, not producing the same as he was earlier in the season or maybe at Villanova, or not producing in the same way that he could in the pros. He might be a better pro than he is a college player as a sort of two-way guy between the arcs, especially with that 2-point line. So
2-point line, shortened field could play to his advantage.
Absolutely could. Yeah. Guys like Trey LeClaire, Connor Kirst, who are right now playing on attack, but could give that attack midfield versatility that I think Rubio has made pretty apparent he wants. He wants versatility, whether that's between attack and midfield in a guy like John Crawley, or between offense and defense in Brian Costabile, Joel Tinney, and now Brent Adams, who he just traded for. So there are going to be a lot of guys like that who maybe Coach Rubier has a role in mind for them and can plug them into this lineup, and they'll get more time on Atlas, right, than they would on any other club in the league right now.
Oh, yeah. We brought up the Whip Snakes before. A guy, Brad Smith, attackman, midi hybrid kind of that can play both. We saw how successful he was, how successful the Whip Snakes were when he was out there. So hopefully the Atlas maybe at the chance to add a player similar to his play style here in this draft. The Water Dogs, they sit at number 2 after Coach Copeland made a point of addressing his defense in the entry draft. He'll have a chance to choose whoever Rubier essentially passes on. And as we've been saying over the last 2 weeks since we debuted this show, the college draft is absolutely loaded. However, we got to keep in mind, though, that some of these guys are seniors that have the opportunity to return for a 5th season as a result of the NCAA's decision to grant all spring athletes another year of eligibility last year. That stretches for the next few seasons. So a handful of notable names: Chris Gray, Nakeem Montgomery, to name 2 of them, the chance to possibly return to school on another season of eligibility. And then to mention the Ivy League, you mentioned Jeff T before. There's a lot of unknowns right now kind of surrounding him. So right there, 3 names actually that Coach Copeland might have circled as we count down the days to the draft. Their plan might not be to play professional lacrosse in 2021. So the storylines that we will follow as we approach the draft. But for Andy Copeland at 2, his only pick in the first 2 rounds, what holes should he be looking to fill? Or is there a guy there that you think is a just absolute no-brainer?
Yeah, I think he needs a stud attackman. I think last year we saw that Water Dogs team with a lot of good players, but not one great player. And we've seen the benefit to having that hierarchy, that pecking order, that knowledge of when the game is on the line, the ball is going to Matt Rambo. And the Whips don't defer to him, but they respect that he's the guy who's going to make a play in that moment. And in last year's championship, it was Zed Williams for the Whips. And whoever that guy is, the Water Dogs have lacked that presence, that go-to guy. They cycled through a lot of different attackmen trying to find the right fits. So at number 2, they absolutely need to add a guy, whether it's Michael Sowers or Jared Bernhardt or Jeff Teat. Like you said, they're essentially picking from whoever Rubio passes up. So all 3 of those really could be that guy for the Water Dogs.
Definitely the opportunity here to get a stud attackman, as you're saying here at number 2. talking to Joe Nardella last week, I interviewed him last week. He says every team here at the top of the draft should be looking at TD Ierlan as that no-brainer. And then I posed him this, given the Water Dogs face-off situation. Obviously, he's not on the Water Dogs, but just in conversation, keep Withers as your lead guy. Get someone to complement him similar to what we saw Drew Simino do last summer, and then trade out of 2 to a team that wants to secure TD. As Andy Copeland, you hopefully get a nice package of picks and maybe a player there in that trade. Now, I'm floating that idea out there, just kind of floating it around for Copeland at 2, and then I would say for Sudan even at 3, given that Copeland seems to have found his face-off man in Withers. Sudan has Connor Farrell manning the X. He's been great over the past 2 seasons. So I'm flowing that out there just for those 2 teams. The Redwoods and the Archers, I'm thinking, being the 2 teams most likely to make a move to secure him. The Redwoods selecting there at 4, the Archers at 5. Do you think we see something like this, something, maybe not in this regard to go try to get TD, but any kind of trade really to move up in the first round? Andy Towers also holds 6 picks, as we mentioned before.
Yeah, AT has a ton of picks. He got his guy Max Adler in the entry draft, but I wouldn't rule him out targeting an Ivy face-off guy. He's sure to have his eye on TD. I think that really is where you draw the line, right? You said that 3 pick for Chrome. That seems to be where you need to get to, potentially higher if you want TD. So if it's the Water Dogs training down, I think it's a matter of securing, like I said, one of those 3 stud attackmen, Bernhardt, Teat, or Sowers. You don't want to trade down and put yourself out of that range and end up in the same situation you were in last year, where you have a lot of guys who can all make a case to get time on the field. So whether it's the Archers leapfrogging the Redwoods or the Redwoods trading up to secure that they don't get jumped, I think we absolutely could see a move as people identify that last need. I think for those 2 teams, the Archers and Redwoods, the face-off position is that one thing that they need. They've addressed everything else. The Archers addressed defense through the entry draft. They got bigger, they got stronger with Grant Hossack and Warren Jeffrey. The Redwoods found their quarterback in Rob Pennell via trade. So they've both addressed their weaknesses on the ends of the field that they thought they could get better at. Right in the middle at the face-off stripe is where they can kind of fit that last piece of the puzzle to get past Nardella and the Whips.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it like in an NFL term. Like you think like NFL teams making trades to try to get up in the first round to secure kind of their quarterback that they see being a part of their future. The same situation I think applies here. Your Redwoods at 4. If TD slips to 4, I think, if the Redwoods pass on him, that's really on them. I don't see them doing it. But obviously, as you're saying, the Archers would have to leapfrog the Redwoods. It depends, though. Do they go to 2? Do they go to 3? If they go to 3, they run the risk of the Redwoods then leapfrogging them to 2, as you were saying there. So definitely stuff to watch. I'm trying to get the ball rolling on that, see if we can get a trade involving some first-round picks in this college draft. We'll see who's tuning into the show and who's not. Based on whether we see a trade like this, we'll see who's actually watching. But speaking of the Redwoods, one of the more interesting things we saw during the first waiver period was Nat St. Laurent adding attackman Andrew Q. He did so with the 4th overall waiver spot, it appears, and then trading him to the Cannons for a 3rd-round pick in this college draft. Very important for St. Laurent, given that he was down picks in this draft from the Miles Jones trade last season. That carried over into this year. He gets that pick back and is able to either use it on a talented player in that 3rd round or as capital, as we're saying, in a possible trade to move up again, trying to push the agenda on that idea. But Joe, interesting move nonetheless. Was this something that was previously discussed as a possible option, or did this kind of just happen, pick up a guy on the waivers and then flip him immediately for a trade?
You'd have to ask Coach Nat.
So this, I guess, just kind of came to Bart. This is a really good move, though, I think, for St. Laurent. And then really for Quirk, adding another lefty attackman, as we're saying. There's so many lefty shooters out there. As we're saying, Mac O'Keefe going to be tough to try to find a spot for him. But Andrew Q, how does he fit into this Cannons team that they're starting to build here?
Yeah, I think he fits in really well. Out of those lefties who were available, I think Mark Cockerton and Andrew Q were really my favorites. And I'm sure Coach Quirk put in a claim for Mark Cockerton and got jumped by the Atlas. Quirk has coached Cockerton for years now with the Cannons. So he missed out on Cockerton and really put an emphasis on finding a guy like Q. I'm sure they could still add another lefty if one falls to them in the college draft. I would not rule that out at all. But for now, it gives them something that they weren't able to find in that expansion draft. They got Deemer Class, who's a left-handed shooter out of the box. They got Brendan Gleason, who's more of a dodging, really a midfielder in this league who can invert and beat his man off the dribble. Not exactly an off-ball lefty. When we talk about like a capital L lefty, we're thinking of those guys, who are sitting on that pipe and can finish inside or sling from the wing.
Absolutely. And hey, we talked about the Atlas. We talked about the Water Dogs, the Archers and Redwoods, obviously looking for probably a face-off man, I would expect. The Chrome, what do you see as a need for them heading into this draft at third overall?
Yeah, I think they're in a unique spot where they retained so much defensively, even though they lost a few guys in the expansion draft. They're getting Joel White back, and they really like their core on that end. They protected Tom Rigney, who played in the MLL last summer in their bubble, but will be with Chrome this year. They're really solid everywhere. So I think they're in a unique spot where they can take the best player available, and that might end up turning some heads, right? Because whoever you peg Chrome to pick right now, if you're picking based on a need, good luck finding a need on that team. I think they're going to take the best player, regardless of who they have currently on their roster, which could shock some people.
That could be a Mike Sowers. That could be a Jeff Teat. That could be a Jared Bernhard. That could be a Mac O'Keefe if they see him as possibly that best player. Handful of names there towards the top of the draft. Loaded draft, as we're saying. Even a defenseman, we could see JT Giles-Harris possibly as a possibility there at third overall. Joe, I want to thank you so much for joining me here on GLE. Liam Kelly will be joining me next to talk college lacrosse. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.